reducing the possessions is the starting point. It's not the finish line.
Right.
And I think quite often we get confused up front. Is like, if I just get rid of my things, then I'll be happy. If I just pare down to whatever is essential, then that will equal perpetual bliss. But minimalism doesn't work like that.
This podcast has bad words.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn. I'm here with my good friend, the shaman from Schaumburg, TK Coleman.
Let's create a great day. I'll ignore the insult.
Wait, why is Schaumburg an insult? I've done a speaking gig in Schaumburg. It's a great place.
I love Schaumburg, but you know that's not about Schaumburg. You're just trying to take Chicago away from me. Don't put this on Schaumburg.
And the beautiful laugh you hear in the background, that is, of course, Malabama. She's on 200 milligrams today for the episode 420.
Hi, everybody. I most definitely am not.
We've got, speaking of episode 420, Nicodemus is going to be joining us here in a little bit during the lightning round. We've got the rest of our team in the studio as well. Coming up today on this free public minimal episode, we are joined by our good friend, Leo Babalta. He's the founder of the popular blog ZenHabits.net, and he's got a brand new podcast out. It's called the Zen Habits Podcast. Together, we're going to talk to a caller about the existential clutter that she's struggling with after all her material clutter is gone. And another listener has a question about being tempted by consumerism again after reducing all of her possessions. Then we've got our lightning round segment, a FAMS question, and a listener tip for you. You can check out the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 420, where we answer 5 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalist. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free because, say it with me, y'all, advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, you can give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice recording right from your phone to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from PK.
Hello, Josh, Ryan, and TK. This is PK calling from Copenhagen. So for the last 2 months or so, I've been getting rid of stuff at quite a high pace and have been feeling the relief every time. Now I'm at this point where I have integrated the principles of minimalism quite well into my everyday life, and I'm enjoying that. But as you guys always say, minimalism is about creating space for what's really important. At this point in my process, I'm starting to deal with some sort of existential dread or anxiety about how I'm spending my time, how I'm choosing what to engage in, be that relationships, career, hobbies, and plans for the future. When I take a look at my life, I am quite privileged in that I have many wonderful friends. I'm close with my family. I have a job which I love, and I have interests and hobbies and time to pursue them. I am not in a relationship at the moment, and I thrive quite well solo, but I would like a significant other at some point. Also, I don't have any children, and I'm not sure I want at any point to have any. I am in my early to mid-30s, and I find myself more than ever faced with the question of what to pursue at a deeper level and how to bring sufficient meaning into my everyday life. So I'd really love to hear you guys talk a bit about whether this is something you recognize, having created space for what is really important in your life and maybe having doubts about what that actually is and how to find it, especially outside of children and marriages, as that is the situation I'm in at the moment.
I often say minimalism is the thing that gets us past the things so we can make room for life's most important things.
Right.
The making room, as she alluded to here. What we realize is the most important things aren't things. And Leo, you really helped me understand that early on, even though you were living with a big family and they had their own things, and it wasn't about affecting their things or changing their things. Right. It was about looking inside yourself and realizing what enough is.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. That was my journey as well. Just like getting rid of my own stuff, not taking away my family stuff because they were gripping to it really tightly. But getting rid of my stuff. At first, it was just about like, it's just too much. It's overwhelming. It's stressful to have all this clutter. And I realized I didn't really need any of that stuff. So in the beginning, it was about getting rid of all of the stuff that was stressing me out. But as I did so, it started to like make what my values were more clear. So I'm like, do I really need this? Does this stuff matter? And so it has you ask that question, like, what actually matters to me? And you realize like none of this stuff matters. Almost none of it matters except for those kids and my wife and other family members. And so I started to, it has you ask that question. And I think it's a really important question. What does matter? And I really love what PK is asking about, because what happens after you strip away all of it, and she's had some amazing success, and I really want to congratulate her on that, is what minimalism does is it strips your shit bare. It lays it all out and surfaces those bigger questions. It's like, what do I really want to do with my life? What's meaningful? And even just like, the emotions that have been there underneath all of this stuff. After you get rid of it, then it's just like, maybe you have some grief left over from losing somebody or something. Maybe you have some like loneliness that starts to surface because I've gotten rid of everything and now I don't have distractions from my loneliness. And that can feel like dread or, because I don't know what I want to be doing with my life. But I actually think we need to surface that, or we don't need to, but it's there and we're just ignoring it and it still has an effect on us. So I've been diving deep into this is like, what's underneath all of this stuff? And this dread that she's talking about, like, that's just the layer of being that's underneath after you remove all of this stuff. And so it's uncertainty, it's loneliness, it's sadness, it's fear. It's all of those things that are already there. And now we're exposed to it. And now we can actually work with it. We can actually like bring some love to it, some attention. It's actually crying for presence. And that's the spiritual stuff that we were talking about before this, the transcendence. That's all what's left after you remove all of this stuff.
TK, I'm fascinated by this question she asked. What to pursue? She's confused about what to pursue. And that presupposes, and I get it, in our culture, what happens? You're supposed to pursue status and things and now follower counts and clout or whatever else it might be. Of course, you're supposed to pursue more wealth, more money, more. And then, of course, then we transfer that to, okay, what other kind of more should I get? It presupposes there is something you should pursue, but that's not necessarily true, I don't think.
Yeah, it just goes to show how a change in circumstance or an outward condition doesn't necessarily produce a change in mindset, right? You can still live a life that's oriented around the pursuit of stuff, even in the absence of stuff. Hey, I've gotten rid of all my stuff, but my whole life has been about the acquisition and organization of stuff. So now my question is, hey, what stuff do I fill this empty space with? What stuff do I do now? And I really like Leo's observation here, where it's like the willingness to just dance with those kinds of questions is a kind of wisdom unto itself, because most people really do spend their whole lives running from a confrontation with their own emptiness. And so to be available to our own emptiness is itself a kind of fullness. And I just want to affirm that as a kind of progress. And what I would say is maybe there's room to shift the question from what should I pursue to who should I pursue? When you think about intimacy in a relationship, if I say, Leo, Josh, I feel like I don't really know you guys. Well, what's the solution to that? We've got to spend some time together. I can't give you a survey or ask you 20 questions to instantaneously manufacture the hard-earned wisdom that only comes through the development of a genuine connection over time. But sometimes when it comes to self-knowledge, we demand all of our wisdom at once because we know that wisdom enhances the quality of life, but sometimes it's life lived that enhances the quality of our wisdom. And so one thing I would propose is setting aside time to construct a rhythm of going on a date with yourself. you've got to get to know yourself because all this stuff has been in the way for a really long time. And you've got some thoughts, some feelings, a lot of stuff going on that's really interesting, that's worth getting to know. And what you're really craving is that sense of alignment, that sense of connection with yourself, that sense of intimacy with your inner being. And you can only get that by saying, I'm going to make me a priority. And whether it's every Wednesday, who was it, Speed Levitch, who said something like on Tuesday nights, I go salsa dancing with myself. And I think something along those lines would be a constructive direction in which to move.
Amen.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Leo, let me ask you, it was a bit of a dance there for you as well, because you were looking at inward and you were saying, okay, I don't necessarily need these things, but then I also have not just the societal pressure, but the familial pressure. Whether it's your immediate family who's living in the same house as you, or maybe it's just the extended family as well. And they have certain expectations. And when we change, it creates pain in our own lives, but sometimes it creates pain for the people around us.
Yeah, that was something that I started to had to grapple with, was like their reaction to my change. And I think the thing that TK is talking about is this kind of like self-introspection, self-discovery really helped with that, because at first it was like they might have their reaction to my changes. So like, let's say they're upset with it or they felt really uncertain about it. And then I take that to mean like, oh, I need to stop doing this. And so I would stop doing what I'm doing, or I would feel really resentful, or I would like push myself to do it. But instead, what I've been doing is just like allowing them to have their reaction. They're just having a reaction to what I'm doing. And so then I can allow them to have their reaction and then allow myself to have my reaction in response to that.
And you're not pathologizing their reaction then and saying, oh, your reaction's wrong. It makes sense quite often when we make a dramatic change, someone else around us. And it's not, PK doesn't have kids and she currently doesn't have a partner, but it doesn't mean she won't have people around her who are questioning or even judging what's going on. But quite often that reaction just says more about the state that they're in right now. I mean, it took me 30 years to stumble into minimalism, expecting my roommate or my spouse or my kids or someone else to then pick it up overnight is just an unrealistic expectation.
And they're allowed to react. They're allowed to be upset or frustrated or afraid at whatever changes that we're creating in their lives. So just allowing that to be and just trusting them.
PK, I'd love to send you a copy of our new old book. So Everything That Remains is a 10-year anniversary now. This Ryan and I moved to Montana in 2012 into a cabin in the middle of nowhere, one traffic light and 3,400 square miles. I got there on October 3rd in the middle of a blizzard. And so there's nothing to do because it's negative 26 degrees every morning. And so nothing to do other than write where we were. And we wrote this book. It's called Everything That Remains. It's written from my perspective. And then throughout, Ryan interrupts me 205 times throughout the book. And so it's rather mimetic of our relationship. He's interrupting me all the time. And then, I'm
you're
picking
doing most
back
of the
up.
talking.
Yes, exactly. Which is ironic because as soon as the mics are off, Ryan does 99% of the talking. Absolutely.
Okay.
Totally.
I'm the most extreme.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah, I'm the most extreme introvert. He's the most extreme extrovert I've ever met. And yet in the creative process here, I really love this book because it's the story of these two suit and tie corporate guys who started reducing their possessions. And we realized pretty quickly, this isn't about the stuff. The stories that we tell ourselves about the stuff, once you get those out of the way, the stuff is not about the stuff. It's about the anxiety and the grief and the expectations that have been hurled onto us through society, and also my own expectations that misled me in this direction, that didn't bring me happiness. I was pursuing, as PK talked about, I was pursuing all of these wrong things, but it wasn't about just pursuing something different. It was about dropping that pursuit altogether, realizing there's a happiness that is embedded. And for the 10-year anniversary of Everything That Remains, we'll send you the audiobook version, or if you want the book or the ebook, we're happy to send those to you as well. PK. This really talented artist from Mexico, her name is Grise, and she is, you can see the artwork here, although this is a not for sale copy here, so there's something ruining her artwork on the cover if you're watching the video version of this. but we'll put a link to the book in the show notes. You can check it out right now. Everything That Remains, 10-year anniversary. And we made it aggressively simple. If you're just listening to the audio version of this, it is just this geometric line drawing of me and Ryan. We took all the words off the cover. Inspired by zenhabits.net, by the way. If you look at his website, it's the most aggressively minimalist, but still communicates everything it needs to communicate. And we stripped this down. We had the title on here. We had the author's names and all this stuff. We're like, no, let's just strip it down to the bare essentials. Just this image. And here's the truth. This is my favorite book that we've ever written. We've had 4 books together, Ryan and I. But it had my least favorite cover. And now it has my absolute favorite cover of any of our books. It's Everything That Remains, the 10-year anniversary. PK, we're going to send you a copy of that book. Our next question is from Kay.
Hi there, my name is Kay. I'm from the UK. My question for you guys is, how do I get back on track after falling off the minimal wagon? I've been decluttering for nearly a year. I was doing really well. My mum had introduced me to yourselves, so I was taking in a lot of your advice and putting it to practice. But recently I found myself, this last sort of 6 weeks or so, really sort of gone back to overspending quite a lot and accumulating unnecessary items. And my house is beginning to feel like really heavy again. And I'm struggling to get back to that minimal mindset. And I put in such a great amount of effort to reduce my belongings, but in like a short space of time, I feel like I really let myself down, and I'm going back down that rabbit hole of consumerism. And I just wondered what advice you would give to help me get back on track. Thank you. Hope you're all well. Bye.
Leo, I think this happens quite a bit. We start letting go, and then we feel a burst of dopamine, of joy, of whatever, from clearing the clutter. But then we start questioning, and as she said, like, she's now enticed by consumerism once again. By the way, we got K, we got PK, we got TK.
A lot of Ks.
She's from the UK.
Hey.
It's all okay.
Yeah, I was like, cut it out, guys.
And so maybe the message here is that it's going to be okay. And there is a bit of existential clutter that's going on with Kay. And it seems like what she's realized is that reducing the possessions is the starting point. It's not the finish line.
Right.
And I think quite often we get confused up front. Is like, if I just get rid of my things, then I'll be happy. If I just pare down to whatever is essential, then that will equal perpetual bliss. But minimalism doesn't work like that, does it?
Yeah, well, there's the underlying thing that has us fill our lives in the first place, right? That doesn't go away right away. And so you get rid of all the stuff, but the impulse, the urge to fill it up is still there. And so, you'll fall back into old habits. And I think, so what we usually do in that place where Kay is like, okay, I want to get back on track, is we just say, okay, now I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to do it right this time. So I'm going to start. Now, this is not just with minimalism, it's with any habit, exercise, eating, meditation. It's like, okay, I fell off. Now I just need to do it. Get back on and do it. And so people will just set themselves like, I'm going to now clear my life out again and just get back on track. But they haven't addressed the thing that got them off track in the first place. And so you can actually do it, but then you're going to fall back into the old habit again because you haven't removed that thing yet, or you haven't addressed it. And so I find that to be it's going to be like spinning in a wheel. You're going to keep going over and over again. And I like to slow it down and just pause where Kay is at, because I find that moment where you're like, I've fallen off and I want to get back on is a spiritual moment. This is a moment when you can just slow down and stop. You don't have to start right away. And first of all, ask yourself, like, how are you feeling about the fact that you fell off? Like, you could hear what she said. She's really like discouraged and feeling bad about herself. So there's like this disappointment in myself. There's like inadequacy that I'm feeling. And so you can just stay there with those feelings and just be like some of that self-discovery that you were talking about. Just be there with that and start to bring some love to that, some compassion. Because that is what we want to solve by like doing the next thing. If I can like go and declutter everything, I'm going to not feel this way anymore. But that doesn't go away. We're kind of like pasting over it just so that we don't have to feel that. So what if we just let ourselves feel it without needing to add a bunch of extra stuff on top of that? And then the next thing in that spiritual moment is like, what caused me to get off track? There's something to be learned in that. We don't like to look back. We want to look forward because that's where the good stuff is going to be. That's the bad stuff. But what if actually there's some good stuff in that we can learn from that? Like, oh, like when I'm online shopping like 24 hours a day, like what's going on there? What's the itch that's underneath that online shopping? And it's like, oh, I'm feeling like unsatisfied with my life, or I'm feeling like I need some kind of like joy in my life, or something else, whatever it is. Like look at the thing that got you off track. And is there something there that you could learn? How is that going to change when you do the next iteration of this? And, like, well, maybe I need to like find some joy. Maybe I need to like address my dissatisfaction with my life. And so you can learn, like mine the data from all of that, of what happened, and then start to move forward. And for moving forward, I like to also go slow. So this is let me just start to ease back into it. Just really just let myself move through it without needing to rush and get to the end, because that's not the point, is getting to the end. It's being part of this process.
That reminds me on the, what do we call it? X?
Yeah.
The social media site,
Twitter's X.
formerly known as Twitter. What you're saying, Leo, reminds me, I just saw a video like this past week on site formerly known as Twitter, where there was some amusement park and there was a ride where people, they didn't fall out entirely, but they were kind of like hanging.
Oh my God.
And people were like, what's wrong with this amusement park? What's wrong with this ride? Who screwed up to make this happen? But you know what no one was asking? No one was asking, what did the people in the ride do to fall out? And I go, hey, that's interesting. But when it comes to us and our efforts to eat better, exercise better, meditate better, treat other people better, when we fall off the wagon, we say, what's wrong with me for falling off that wagon? We never say, what's wrong with the wagon that it wasn't able to sustain me? And sometimes when it comes to our goals and our failures, it's because we have these systems that are just not sustainable. But the thing about an unsustainable system is, if you're sufficiently motivated, fired up, you can implement it for a while and you can put on a really impressive run of like 2 weeks, 2 months, but then you fall off that wagon. You go, what's wrong with me? And it's like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. What happened was you put a system in place that's just not sustainable. And it took 2 months, 2 years, or whatever it was for you to realize, hey, we need to go back to the drawing board and ask, what is it about my wagon that isn't able to sustain me? I know that I want to change. I know what my intentions are. Maybe I'm driving this wagon down the wrong road. Or maybe there's something about the way I've designed it that just isn't allowed to last for longer than a year. And I would go back to that wagon and I would say, I know who I want to be, but is there a way to be the person that I want to be in a manner that allows more room for grace, more room for humanity? Instead of saying, I'm going to get up and read 6 hours a day every day, or I'm going to run 6 miles every day. Is there a way to set some goals or establish a process that's a little more human and that allows me to be honest about what I know I can do even on my worst day of the week? And I would take a look at something with my process. Yeah.
I was just talking to a friend about this last night. In fact, she's going through a lot of things. She's kind of beating herself up over, I've made these decisions, I've got these bad habits now, or I've picked them back up. And the thing I've learned most from meditation is like, you can always begin again. In fact, that is always what we're doing. Even if we continue what we perceive to be a bad habit, it's not even a continuation so much as it is continuing to begin again with that bad habit. So much so that it does become routine. But the good news there is the opposite is also true. It is possible to begin again. It doesn't mean that you have to start everything over. It doesn't even mean you have to do anything. Beginning again doesn't mean, I've done all the bad things and now it's time for me to do the good things. It isn't even necessarily about the doing. As Leo just suggested, you can sit with it for a moment. You can slow down and say, okay, let me reflect on these choices I've made and the actions I've made. And maybe the the antidote to it is not better choices and better actions and better habits and betterment of myself. It's actually witnessing and understanding where this comes from so I can move on and I can let go of those habits that I'm clinging to. Do you have anything to say about that, Leo?
Yeah, sitting with it, as you were saying, is a beginning again. This is where what we usually do is try and rush past the feelings that we're having about things, the urges that we're having. We want to move beyond all of the stuff that we're feeling. We don't even notice we're feeling it, so we just rush and distract ourselves. So sitting with it is a beginning again, where it's just like, let me just sit with this, feel what I'm feeling about how I failed or about, all the things that I bought, feel what's driving me to buy all that stuff. And let me just sit with it. And if you could just be with that, free of the story about it. So there's a story that we have about ourselves where we're like, I'm crappy that I did all of these things, and some kind of story of inadequacy. And so that is going to continually drive that stuff up in us. And so if we can just be with the sensation in the body, it's like, where is it located in your body? Okay, right here in the heart, I'm feeling like a tightness. What else do you notice about that? I'm feeling like a tenderness underneath that. My breath is shallow and a little bit of a hollowness in my stomach. There's no story about that. Those are just what's happening right now in the moment. So that's what I would say, is just sit with all of that. And if you can have an empowering relationship to that, it'll change it. So it's like, okay, right now I'm feeling disempowered about it because I want to get rid of it. I don't like it. I think there's something about it that means I am failed and I suck. But what if those feelings are just like a tenderness? Like, what if it's just as you said, your humanity, like just your humanity right now, feeling a little bit tender about how things have gone. And so if you could just sit with your humanity, that's a beautiful thing. And it's not anything that we need to like get away from or disempower.
It's funny. I was in the grocery store just a couple of days ago, and I was walking down the cookie aisle, and to my eyes, the cookies looked so good. And I looked at them to give it a thought. And I didn't even notice that I started doing this. I started soothing my stomach. And when I looked at that, I'm like, oh, my body is telling me like I already feel uncomfortable at the thought of eating those cookies.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
so
I was
you're soothing it for like after.
I was soothing it for the discomfort I knew I would feel. Like I could just feel at a gut level, like my body doesn't want it. They look good to my eyes and my mind wants it, but my body doesn't want this. And so when you're talking about being present to the body and like sensing that tightness, one of the cool things about it is once you cultivate that awareness, you get to bring that to the development of your processes. So as you're designing your wagon, sometimes your body will tell you like, hey, I don't want that many wheels on my wagon. I don't want my wagon to be colored that way or set up in that way. And you can sort of know what process is right for you just based on how it feels sometimes.
Alabama, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer your questions from TikTok.
Yes, indeed. You can follow The Minimalists on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, and Threads. We're at The Minimalists on all of those platforms. Now, during the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We put the text to these minimal maxims in the show notes over at theminimalists.com/podcast, so you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you'd like. And by the way, if you want those minimal maxims delivered to your inbox every Monday, just sign up for our email list, theminimalists.email. We'll never send you advertisements. We'll never send you spam. We'll never send you junk. But we will start your week off with a little bit of pithy insight. We'll simplify your week at the very beginning. Joining us right now for the lightning round is my best friend, Ryan Nicodemus.
What is up, y'all? Hey, friends. Oh, it's so good to be here.
Ryan, I was just thinking about this. Our friendship is 32 years old right now, which means during the next election cycle, our best friendship can run for president.
Wow.
Dude, let's do it.
No, not us. Just our friendship.
Oh. Dibs on vice president. All right.
No way. Nicodemus looks way better on the t-shirt, right? Nicodemus Milburn 2028 or whatever. By the way, I was just looking at the new book cover that Grise put together, the talented artist from Mexico. And I forgot to mention, I gave away one of these books. I'm holding it up right now for folks watching the video version. We stripped away everything. All the words are gone from the cover. Well, not from the book itself, but just from the cover. The words are still in the book. I've checked. But it's this great drawing of me and Ryan that she did years ago, and I always knew I wanted to use this. And I would say check out her website. It's grise.art. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Ryan, let's dive into this lightning round. Taki Bear from TikTok has a question for us.
Our smartphones give us access to books, music, notebooks, recorders, cameras, photo albums, maps, watches, calculators, and on and on. Does this mean smartphones are a minimalist tool or a maximalist device?
Ryan, I thought this question was perfect for this episode because we just talked to Leo Babalta about this earlier in the episode. Someone called in and he called in and he had a question about multi-purpose tools. And sometimes it can be like a smartphone as a multi-purpose tool, but other times it can be you buy one pair of shoes and it replaces 7 other shoes that you didn't really like that much. And the same can be true with a shirt you buy, or certainly some pants are really versatile. So there are some pants you could wear to a wedding and to the gym, and maybe you don't have to have 14 different pairs of pants. But let's talk to Taki Bear specifically about the smartphone. Do you have something pithy for him?
Oh, yes. The smartphone is a minimal tool that causes maximal distraction. And, when we go into questions like this, asking if a smartphone is a minimal or maximal device, we can get caught into binary thinking because it's a lot easier to just say smartphone good or smartphone bad. But, most material possessions, they don't have an inherently good or bad label. The question is, who possesses it and how do they use it?
Yeah, I think that's spot on because that tool is really useful. I had Mallory buy some duct tape recently, and now post-production Peter is tied up in our basement right now. We let him out just to master the episode.
That's what you needed that for.
Yeah,
I was wondering.
How did you sneak him out of my basement?
And so that duct tape is a great tool. You can use it to, of course, tape a duct or a duck, whatever you want to tape. But actually, I think that's a good illustration here. I might need that tape to fix something, or I might use it to harm someone or harm myself. How are you using the tool? And quite often with the smartphone, we're using it beyond its usefulness to the point where, you know what? It was useful, but now it is harmful in the way that I'm using it. TK, you got something pithy for us?
Yeah. So minimalism is the antidote to excess, but it doesn't have to be the enemy of access. Imagine if I'm in a grocery store, there are so many options, more things than I could ever need. But if I try to stuff it all into my cart, it instantly becomes clutter and the access gets transformed into excess. But when I step back and I say, let me remember why I came here and let me find the best combination of what I want, what I need, and what I can afford, that stuff comes out of the cart, goes back on the shelf, and then the excess becomes access. So whether we're talking about grocery stores or the smartphone, that's what happens when intentionality meets abundance. But in the absence of that intentionality, the abundance does become excess.
It becomes superabundance to the point where now it's getting in the way.
Dang, TK, that was awesome. How dare you dunk on me like that?
And then I hung on the rim for an extra 10 seconds, waiting for somebody to take a picture of it.
Anybody see this?
It makes me going back to the tool example. When you look at a hammer, is it a tool or is it a weapon? Well, it depends on how you use it. And I would say the same thing is true with your smartphone. Is it a tool that is useful, or is it a blunt object you use to harm yourself with? Depends on how you use it. You could even say that for the specific apps on the phone. Instagram isn't inherently harmful, but man, it can certainly be addictive. The same thing is true with many of the things that we get addicted to. It was maybe helpful at first, but at some point, when we rely on it to pacify us or to make us feel better, what happens? It ceases being a tool and it starts being a weapon that we use to harm ourselves. All right, real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing, or actually two things going on in the life of the Minimalists. Our audiobook for Love People Use Things. It's a 10-hour audiobook. It's now available for anyone who has Spotify Premium. Obviously, this isn't an ad. Ryan and I, we just got the email yesterday from the folks over at Macmillan to let us know that that audiobook that he and I read, it's 10 hours long, and one of our favorite things that we've written, our most recent book, Love People Use Things, is now available. Well, it's always been available as an audiobook. Now it's available on Spotify for anyone who has Spotify Premium. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Also, this Sunday, December 3rd, 2023, Sunday Symposium is back and in a new venue. I'll tell you this, the event sold out immediately. But we did set aside 50 free tickets for folks who couldn't afford to join us. Now, these tickets, they don't guarantee you a seat, but they do guarantee you entry into our new venue. It's the Greenway Theater over here in West Hollywood. And what a beautiful, perfect theater for this event. Here are a few details real quick. By the way, get your ticket right now. They're free, but they'll go immediately because they're free. I mean, the ones that weren't free went immediately. SundaySymposium.com. Just a few details here. You want to arrive by 11 a.m., maybe even a little sooner. We're going to do some coffee and community mingling at the beginning of this. This is the perfect venue for that. We've got some lawn space out front, so bring your blanket or chairs if you want to hang out with other folks, including the Minimalists will be hanging out in the patio where there's all this mingling that can happen there. And then 11:30, we've got Kelly Jean coming back to do a sound bath for half an hour at 11:30. The Minimalists will be on at noon, and then we'll do a hug line somewhere around 1 o'clock. So get there early by 11 or even earlier for some coffee, some time with the Minimalists. It's going to be an outstanding event. SundaySymposium.com. And Alabama, every month we do the Friday afternoon Minimalist Zooms, the first Friday of each month. You can have a Zoom call with the Minimalists. We answer your questions. We talk about what's going on in our lives. You can turn your camera on. You can join us, or you can just turn your camera off and be a fly on the wall. You can observe the call. This is for anyone who subscribes to the video version of our private podcast. And Alabama's over there in the chat during all of those calls, and she's collecting your questions, the ones we can't get to. We'll talk about on the podcast. Do you have one for us right now?
I sure do. This one comes from Joanna. Do you feel that on some level you now have an identity as minimalists, as opposed to looking for an identity through things?
Ryan, I'm thinking about Ram Dass here. And he says, oh, that's cute. You think you have an identity. But our identity is basically whatever story we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Yeah.
And so like my identity is I am the director of operations at this telecom company, or my identity is I'm a husband, or my identity is I'm a truck driver. My identity is I'm a yoga instructor. My identity is I am a minimalist, or I'm one of the minimalists. And I think that's fine. There's nothing inherently evil or bad about identities. The problem is when we cling to that identity so far that it doesn't serve us anymore. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, minimalism to me, it couldn't even be an identity. It's more of a way of life. I mean, I guess we are the minimalists, so that's what our website defines us as, but I really don't look at it as an identity. And I'll say something too, just to kind of piggyback off of you pointing out how an identity isn't a good or a bad thing. In fact, it could be a very useful thing in a lot of ways if we are using it to help signify decisions that we make in our lives. And, if we're doing the decisions that align with our purpose, then that's a great identity to use. But if you're doing things outside of your purpose, outside of your values, just so you can have a certain identity, well, that's going to bring misery.
Yeah, absolutely. TK, any insights here?
Yeah, I think of identity as kind of like a sense of self. And I think of brand as a role that you play in a public space. So when I first went to the cinema when I was much younger and I saw a school teacher there, I was blown out of my mind. What is she doing here? She's a teacher. And it's like, I confused her brand with her identity, the role that she plays at a school with the totality of who she is. And sometimes we get those things mixed up. I think of all the times where people are like, oh, I thought you were a minimalist. What are you doing owning an object? It's like, oh, wait a minute. There's more to me than your particular understanding of the philosophy of minimalism, right? Or like when I say I listen to Christmas music every day, some people attach an only to that. You only listen to Christmas music? You don't listen to anything else? No, I listen to Christmas music every day, but I also listen to a whole lot of other stuff. And so what I find to be interesting about those two things is that it's often the other way around. I feel free to make whatever choices are best for me, but sometimes when I interact with other people that are only familiar with the brand and not the personalities behind the brand, they're shocked to realize that there are other things we talk about besides minimalism, or that we don't believe it's a sin to wear a blue colored t-shirt.
The other music he listens to is just Milli Vanilli on repeat.
Not just Milli Vanilli, just Girl You Know It's True.
Wow. You seem more like a blame it on the rain guy. Although, now I think about it, TK doesn't blame anyone for anything. So maybe he just has to blame everything.
That's a truth.
On the rain. Ryan, what I'm hearing here is it's okay to have an identity, but man, we're probably best served if we hold that identity loosely, because over time, what happens is our identity changes as we change, as we get a new understanding of the world, as we grow, as we take on a family or we move to a new location. All of those things can become part of our identity. This is who I am as a person, but I'm also willing to let that identity go if it's no longer serving me. Ryan, can you stick around for a little bit more? I've got this talk-aboutable I want to talk to you about on the private podcast. I got to tell you this, man. We accidentally did one of the most controversial things that we've ever done. And it was last time, of course, is when Ryan was in the studio for episode 416.
Oh, that's crazy.
And I got to talk to you about it. But first, Alabama, what do you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hi, my name is Rebecca, and I'm a patron subscriber from the UK. I just wanted to write in and thank the whole Minimalist team for all that you do. The content you create has given me so much guidance and hope in a time of turmoil. A year and a half ago, my relationship of 7 years was ending. We lived in a 4-bedroom house piled with stuff. He was emotionally abusive and stated that because I had made the decision to end it, he would choose what he wanted to keep and the leftovers would be mine. He chose to keep about 80% of our co-purchased belongings. 2 months later, I was in a 1-bedroom small house with little remaining of what I had worked hard for those 7 years. I was in a state of horrible depression, anxiety, and grief. This was not the way I'd wanted life to go. I felt that because I had lost my stuff, my relationship, and my home, I had in turn lost myself. But these are the stories we tell ourselves. A few months later, I discovered your book, Love People, Use Things, and it gave me a new perspective about relationships, about things, and about myself. I had felt like I was hindered from being the person I strove to be because of the anger, bitterness, sadness, the emotional clutter that I carried with me. But I realized I could work through the difficult emotions and still be my best self. I started to follow your podcast on Spotify, and then became a Patreon subscriber a few months ago. Not only do your weekly podcasts help me reassess how I view the world, they've also helped me gain courage to tackle areas of my life I didn't think I could, such as cutting toxic relationships, handling difficult conversations, and most recently making drastic changes to my diet to help with chronic disease. I wanted to end this message by sharing an excerpt from Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Happiness, that I find a lot of value in, and I think reflects the values of the minimalists. I have passed through many storms. Each storm has to pass. There is no storm that will stay here forever. This condition of the mind will also go by. Everything is impermanent. This storm is only a storm. We are not only a storm. We can find safety right in the storm. We will not let the storm create harm in us. Thank you again for all that you do. Much love.
All right, y'all. We'll see you on Patreon for the full 2-hour Maximal edition of episode 420, which includes answers to a bunch more questions. Look at all these questions, TK. We're going to talk about, this is not how I wanted to live my life. Is this how I want to live my life? What is the purpose of a thing? if it isn't to be used or to be enjoyed. We're going to talk about multi-purpose tools. We've got some other questions here about holiday shopping and how we've turned the holiday season into the holiday shopping season. Also, let's talk about midlife crises and the crisis of excess in our lives. We've got so much more to talk about in the private podcast, so much more of less. And if you want to hear all that, visit patreon.com/theminimalist or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You'll also gain access to all of our podcast archives, all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials, so if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can join for 7 days for free. And if you're still on the fence, here's a testimonial from one of our lovely Patreon subscribers. Karen says, I am a new private podcast subscriber, and I can't thank you enough, Joshua, Ryan, and TK, for the value you bring to my life. The insights you share on the private podcast have helped me see the world from a different perspective, and I now live each day with intention and joy. I appreciate that you do not prescribe specific activities or views and recognize the unique needs and values of each member of your audience. The impact you have had and continue to have on my life is tremendous, and I credit you for opening my eyes. I am finally embracing feeling complete on my own, not clinging to others, living in the present and celebrating the new beginnings that come from necessary endings. My appreciation for the Minimalist Private Podcast is boundless. Wow.
Wow.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
That is our minimal episode for today. You can check out Ryan Nicodemus at ryannicodemus.com. That is where he posts his monthly mentoring message. You can get on his email list over there as well. And of course, Leo Babalta, zenhabits.net, also the Zen Habits podcast. We'll put a link to all of that over in the show notes. If you leave here today with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.